The first time anyone saw Selma Ben-Sella in Birmingham, Alabama, she carried an air of quiet elegance and mystery. She had arrived in 2018, stepping off a plane from Paris with nothing but a single suitcase and a past she never spoke about. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes held secrets, and her accent, soft yet sharp, made heads turn when she spoke. Selma was Algerian by birth but had lived in France before coming to the US. She told people she had moved for a fresh start, though she never explained what she was running from. At 34, she was strikingly beautiful, long black hair that cascaded down her back, and a posture that hinted at both confidence and control. She settled in Birmingham, a city where no one knew her, and opened a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. The cafe, named Cille d'Alger, served Algerian pastries, fresh mint tea, and strong Turkish coffee. The place quickly became popular with college students and professionals alike. Yet, despite the warmth of her cafe, Selma remained distant. She would smile politely at customers, but she rarely engaged in small talk. Locals were fascinated by her. Who was this mysterious woman? What had brought her to Alabama of all places? Some speculated she had been a model in France. Others whispered that she was escaping a troubled past. Selma never confirmed or denied any rumors. But beneath her beauty and charm lay something darker. Selma had always been a woman who valued loyalty above all else. Growing up in Algeria, she had seen the consequences of betrayal firsthand. Her mother had been abandoned by her father, left to raise Selma alone. As she grew older, she learned the painful truth. Her father had left them for another woman. That betrayal had burned into her soul, leaving behind a wound that had never healed. Her own experiences with men had only reinforced her distrust. A fiancé in Paris had broken her heart, leaving her for a younger woman just weeks before their wedding. She had sworn never to be humiliated like that again. And so, she rebuilt herself, stronger, colder, and unwilling to tolerate deception. She had promised herself that if a man ever betrayed her again, he wouldn't walk away unscathed. And in Alabama, 3 men were about to learn just how far she was willing to go. Selma Ben-Sella had come to Alabama for a fresh start, but fate had other plans. The first man to betray her was Daniel Carter, a real estate agent with a silver tongue and a roving eye. Daniel had been one of her first customers at Cille d'Alger. Tall, handsome, and in his early 40s, he carried himself with the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. He had come in for a quick espresso, but the moment he laid eyes on Selma, he made sure to become a regular. At first, Selma resisted his charm. She had seen men like him before, smooth talkers who knew exactly what to say to make a woman feel special. But Daniel was persistent. He would stop by the cafe every morning, sometimes bringing her small gifts. A book, a bottle of French wine, a rare Algerian spice he had found at a specialty store. "I've never met a woman like you," he told her one evening as they sat in the dimly lit cafe after closing hours. "You're different, mysterious. I want to know everything about you." Selma hesitated. She had sworn not to let another man get close. But Daniel was patient, and eventually, she let her guard down. He told her he was married but claimed his marriage was dead. "We live in the same house, but it's nothing more than a contract," he assured her. "I want out. I want you." For a while, Selma believed him. Their affair was passionate, secretive, intoxicating. But Selma was no fool. She had been lied to before, and when she began to sense something was off, she decided to test him. One evening, she casually mentioned a weekend trip. "Let's go away together," she suggested. "Just us. Somewhere quiet." Daniel hesitated. I have some work obligations. But soon, I promise." That was her first clue. The second came a few days later when she saw a social media post. Daniel's wife had shared a picture of the two of them at a family barbecue, looking very much in love. There were no signs of a broken marriage, no distance between them. Selma felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but this time, she wasn't going to cry herself to sleep. That night, she made a plan. Selma invited Daniel over to her apartment for dinner the next evening. She played the perfect lover, soft-spoken, seductive, and warm. She served him couscous with lamb, a dish from her homeland, along with a strong Algerian wine. Daniel ate heartily, drinking more than he should have, unaware that he was sealing his fate with every sip. As he finished his third glass, his vision blurred. His limbs felt heavy. He looked at Selma in confusion. What's happening? He slurred, his body slumping against the chair. Selma leaned forward, her green eyes cold. You lied to me, she whispered. Daniel's head lolled to the side. His heart pounded, fear creeping in as he realized he was losing control of his body. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. Selma stood, walking slowly toward him. She ran a finger along his jawline, her expression unreadable. Then, in one swift motion, she pulled out a thin, sharp blade and pressed it against his throat. You told me you loved me, she murmured. You promised me honesty. Daniel tried to struggle, but he was too weak. The sedative she had laced his wine with had done its job. With one decisive movement, she slit his throat. The room filled with the scent of blood and wine. Daniel gurgled, his body convulsing before going still. Selma exhaled slowly, watching as the life drained from his eyes. She felt no remorse, only a quiet satisfaction. She wiped the blade clean, then calmly set to work. An hour later, Daniel Carter had disappeared. His car was found abandoned near a wooded area miles away, his body buried beneath the cold Alabama soil. To the world, Daniel Carter had simply vanished. His wife reported him missing, but with no signs of foul play, the case went cold. Selma continued her life as if nothing had happened. She returned to Ciel d'Alger, serving pastries and tea with a serene smile. But the taste of revenge was addictive, and it wouldn't be long before another man betrayed her trust. For weeks after Daniel Carter's disappearance, Selma Ben-Sulla carried on as if nothing had changed. She ran her cafe with the same quiet grace, greeting customers with a soft smile and serving pastries with delicate precision. No one suspected that behind those emerald green eyes lay the mind of a woman who had just committed murder. The thrill of watching Daniel take his last breath had awakened something inside her, an intoxicating sense of control. He had betrayed her, just like every other man before him. But this time she had not been the victim. She had rewritten the ending of the story, and she was about to do it again. Mark Holloway was different from Daniel. A 36-year-old corporate lawyer, Mark had a boyish charm that made him seem harmless. With his neatly combed blonde hair, expensive suits, and polished Southern manners, he was the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel special. Selma met him at her cafe one evening just as she was closing. He had stopped by for a quick coffee after a late meeting and struck up a conversation. Unlike Daniel, Mark didn't try to impress her with gifts or empty promises. He listened. He asked about Algeria, about her life in France, about what had brought her to Alabama. For the first time in years, Selma felt something close to trust. Over the next few weeks, their relationship blossomed. Mark was attentive, respectful, and unlike Daniel, single, at least that's what he claimed. Selma let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Until one night when everything changed. Selma had never been the type of woman to snoop, but experience had taught her that men were rarely as honest as they seemed. One evening, while Mark was in the shower, she glanced at his phone. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through his messages. There they were, the words she had dreaded. A conversation with a woman named Emily. Emily, I can't wait to see you this weekend. Are you sure your work trip excuse will hold up? Mark, of course, babe. Selma doesn't suspect a thing. The blood drained from Selma's face. She had been a fool. Again. For a moment, she simply stared at the screen, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The betrayal was like a knife to her chest. But this time, she didn't cry. She smiled. She had been through this before, and she knew exactly how to handle it. That evening, Selma was the perfect girlfriend. She kissed Mark deeply when he stepped out of the shower, whispering sweet nothings in his ear. She prepared his favorite meal, grilled lamb with couscous, pouring him a glass of red wine as they talked late into the night. Mark had no idea he was already a dead man. Selma waited a few days before making her move. She needed the perfect setting. One Friday night, she suggested they take a weekend trip together. "Just us," she said, tracing her fingers down his arm. "No work, no distractions. Let's go somewhere quiet." Mark, completely unaware of what she had seen on his phone, agreed eagerly. She chose a secluded cabin in the woods just outside Birmingham, far enough that no one would hear him scream. The cabin was perfect, isolated, surrounded by dense trees, and utterly silent. Selma had planned everything meticulously. That evening, she cooked for Mark again, just as she had for Daniel. This time, she laced his drink with a heavier dose of the sedative. Within minutes, Mark's eyelids drooped. He tried to speak, but his words slurred. His body felt sluggish, heavy. What's going on?" he mumbled, his head lolling to the side. Selma knelt beside him, tilting his chin up with 2 fingers. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice soft but deadly. Mark's dazed eyes flickered with confusion. "What?" She held up his phone. "Open the messages with Emily. Let him see the evidence of his own deception." His face contorted in fear. "Selma, She pressed a finger to his lips. "Shoo," she cooed. "No more lies." Then she reached for the rope. Unlike Daniel, Mark's death was slower. She wrapped the rope around his throat, tightening it as he struggled weakly. His body convulsed, hands grasping at nothing, eyes bulging with terror. Selma watched the life drain from him, her grip unyielding. She felt no pity, no remorse, only satisfaction. When it was over, she leaned close to his lifeless face and whispered, "Goodbye, my love." She cleaned up meticulously, just as she had before. Mark's body was never found. His car was discovered parked outside an abandoned gas station. His disappearance classified as another missing person case. To the world, Mark Holloway had simply vanished. To Selma, he had received exactly what he deserved. But her work was not yet done. One more man would betray her, and this time the world would take notice. Selma Ben-Sulla had become something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. A woman with an insatiable thirst for revenge. Her ability to meticulously plan and execute her killings without leaving a trace of evidence was becoming legendary. She had already taken the lives of 2 men, both of whom had betrayed her in the cruelest ways, and yet, the rush of satisfaction from their deaths wasn't enough. There was still one more who had wronged her, a man who was about to become her most satisfying victim. Victor Harris was everything Selma despised. He was a powerful businessman, a self-proclaimed ladies' man, and a manipulator who prided himself on his ability to get whatever he wanted with his charm and wealth. He had entered Selma's life in the most unexpected way, through a mutual acquaintance at an upscale charity event. They had shared a fleeting conversation over hors d'oeuvres, and while Selma had initially dismissed him as just another arrogant rich man, she couldn't help but notice the way he eyed her. His smile was too confident, his compliments too smooth, and when he offered to help her expand her business, Selma knew immediately that this was no innocent gesture. He was trying to get close to her, and perhaps into her bed. Victor was the kind of man who didn't believe in loyalty. He saw relationships as transactions, fleeting and disposable. Selma had witnessed this firsthand when he casually mentioned his ongoing affair with a married woman, flaunting the details with the same detachment that he used to talk about business deals. Selma had no intention of falling into his trap, but she knew exactly how to use his arrogance against him. Victor took the bait quickly. He pursued Selma relentlessly, showering her with expensive gifts, diamond earrings, designer dresses, and promises of business partnerships that would take her cafe to new heights. He made her feel special, different from the others. At first, Selma kept her distance, maintaining a cool demeanor while playing along with his advances. Soon, however, she learned enough to know that Victor wasn't just after her business. He was after her, plain and simple. He wanted to possess her, just as he had done with countless other women before. And Selma, ever the strategist, knew exactly how to turn his own arrogance into his undoing. Victor believed that he was invincible, that no woman could resist him for long. He was used to getting what he wanted, and Selma was just another challenge to conquer. But what he didn't realize was that Selma was playing a game of her own, a game that would end in his demise. Selma's plan unfolded in stages. First, she fed into Victor's ego, allowing him to believe that he was making progress with her. She responded to his flirtations, accepted his gifts, but kept the ultimate goal in mind: revenge. Then, Selma did something that Victor would never expect. She let him think he had won her over, offering him her company at a private dinner one evening. She made sure the setting was perfect: a secluded rooftop restaurant, an intimate candlelit atmosphere that would make any man think he had finally broken through her defenses. As they dined, Selma let Victor believe that she had fallen for him. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm lightly, and even teased him with the promise of more. The evening wore on, and by the time dessert arrived, Victor was confident that he had her completely under his spell. What he didn't know was that this was the moment she had been waiting for. Selma had carefully planned her revenge. She had a dose of a potent drug, an undetectable poison that would work silently, slowly paralyzing his nervous system while giving him no indication of what was happening until it was too late. She slipped the powder into his drink when he wasn't looking, making sure to stir it just enough that it wouldn't be obvious. She then watched with growing satisfaction as Victor took his first sip, unaware that he had just sealed his fate. The poison took effect quickly. Victor's breath slowed, and his words became slurred. At first, he assumed it was just the wine, but the look in Selma's eyes told him something else was happening. What's going on?" he slurred, his hand fumbling for his glass. Selma leaned forward, her lips curling into a soft smile. "You never learn, do you, Victor?" she whispered. "You thought you could play me just like all the others. But you never knew who you were dealing with." Victor's face twisted in panic as he tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead. His heart pounded, but it was growing weaker with every passing second. "You were never going to win," Selma continued, her voice cold and calculating. "You were just another man who thought he could betray me. But you were wrong. You're the last one, the final piece in my plan." As he struggled for breath, his vision blurring, Selma simply sat back, watching the man who had once thought himself untouchable crumble before her. By the time Victor's body was found, it was too late. His death was ruled as an accident, a result of an apparent heart attack. The police found no signs of foul play, no evidence, no witnesses. To the outside world, Victor Harris had simply died in his sleep, a victim of his own vices. But Selma knew the truth, and so did she. She had taken everything from him: his life, his pride, his belief in invincibility. And in doing so, she had finally finished what she had set out to do: avenge the countless betrayals she had suffered at the hands of men like him. Selma Bensella was no longer a woman with a past to hide. She was the author of her own story, a woman who had rewritten her fate in the blood of those who had wronged her. Her revenge was complete. Selma had finally found peace, or so she thought. Her vengeful journey seemed to be over, her past of betrayal and bloodshed behind her. But then came James Miller, a smooth-talking businessman who walked into her life like a breath of fresh air. Tall, charming, and genuinely kind, he seemed different from the others. He listened to her, respected her independence, and never once spoke of possessiveness or control. For weeks, he made her feel seen, not just as a woman, but as someone worth cherishing. Selma allowed herself to believe that maybe she could finally let go of the past, that she could experience love without betrayal. But then, as always, the truth came crashing down. Selma discovered that James had been seeing another woman, a younger, more innocent version of her. He'd been lying to both of them, feeding them the same empty promises of a future together. The final straw came when she found a letter in his drawer, her name written in bold, but with a different woman's handwriting beneath it. "I love you, James. Please don't leave me." In that moment, Selma's resolve hardened. She knew what she had to do. She had learned the game and she had mastered it. That evening, she invited James over for dinner, just like before. She poured the wine, and when he leaned in to kiss her, she whispered softly, "You won't betray me again." James never saw it coming. The poison she slipped into his drink was quick and final. He slumped forward, his eyes wide in confusion as his world faded to black. There was no need for an elaborate plan this time. No theatrics. Just the calm certainty of a woman who had been wronged one too many times. James Miller became just another casualty in Selma's quiet, calculated revenge. She left him in the apartment, his body cold and lifeless, and walked out into the night, free from the chains of deceit that had bound her for so long. Her final lover's deception had been her most satisfying. As Selma walked away from her final act of vengeance, the world outside her quiet life began to stir. News of James Miller's sudden death spread quickly, and the police, once again, were left with a mystery on their hands. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious cause of death, and nothing that pointed directly to foul play. Detective Sarah Hayes was assigned to the case. She had been working in the department for years, handling cases of domestic abuse and missing persons, but this felt different. There was something chilling about the deaths of these men, all tied together in ways that seemed more than just coincidence. As the investigation into James Miller's death unfolded, Sarah found herself drawn into a web of unanswered questions. Selma's name surfaced during the questioning of James' business associates, but no one seemed to know much about her, except that she had a reputation for being private, perhaps even secretive. The connections between the men Selma had killed began to emerge, each one linked by their betrayal, each death raising more suspicion. Sarah began to wonder if they were looking at more than just a string of random fatalities. In a small town like Selma, where everyone knew each other's business, the investigation quickly turned personal. Detective Hayes began to piece together a picture of a woman with a past, a woman who might have had more to do with the deaths than anyone realized. But Selma, like always, remained one step ahead. Just when Detective Sarah Hayes thought she was closing in on the truth, a surprising twist turned the case upside down. A breakthrough came when a local informant came forward, someone who had once been close to Selma. The informant, a former business partner, revealed that Selma had been receiving threatening messages from an anonymous source in the weeks before James Miller's death. The messages spoke of her past, her previous lovers, her affairs, and hinted that someone was watching her every move. As Sarah dug deeper into the messages, she discovered a hidden pattern. The anonymous letters seemed to mimic the behavior of a man who had once been part of Selma's life, a man she had not yet spoken of in her interviews. Khaled Amir, the first man Selma had loved and lost. Khaled had vanished years earlier, after a violent breakup with Selma. She had never mentioned him to anyone, but the informant confirmed that Khaled had been seen in town recently, stirring up trouble. The investigation shifted focus. Was Khaled truly alive? And if so, had he been orchestrating the deaths of Selma's lovers out of revenge for their betrayal? Or had Selma been framed all along? With new evidence in hand, Sarah realized that the case had just become more complicated and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Selma Ben-Sulla was arrested and charged with the deaths of 3 men, Victor Harris, James Miller, and the others who had been entangled in her web of betrayal. The media quickly dubbed her the Black Widow, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as her trial began. Detective Sarah Hayes was ready to testify, her case seemingly solid with the evidence pointing directly to Selma. Yet, Selma's defense was sharp and strategic. Her lawyer argued that there was no direct proof of her involvement in the deaths, and that the mysterious messages from Khaled Amir could be the key to her innocence. As the trial unfolded, Selma remained calm and composed, refusing to show any sign of guilt. Her eyes never wavered as she sat silently, even as the prosecution painted her as a cold-hearted killer who had used love as a weapon. The defense, on the other hand, painted her as a victim of manipulation and obsession, suggesting that someone from her past had framed her. But the twist came when Selma herself took the stand. In a calm and chilling confession, she admitted to killing the men, but she claimed it was not out of malice, but out of necessity. She spoke of a life of betrayal, of a past so haunted by men who had used her, that revenge had become her only way to regain control. The jury deliberated and the verdict was clear. Selma was guilty, but with a sentencing that shocked everyone. Life in prison without parole. Selma's cold, unrepentant gaze lingered on the courtroom as she was led away, her final act of revenge completed, but the truth of her twisted journey now sealed within the walls of a cell. The trial of Selma Ben Salah sent ripples through the small town. Her name became infamous, and her story lingered in the public's mind long after the verdict. Some saw her as a victim, trapped in a world of deceit, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer. The debate continued, but the town could never quite forget the woman who had taken the lives of 3 men in the name of revenge. In prison, Selma found a strange sense of peace. Behind bars, there were no more games to play, no more men to deceive or betray her. She was alone, but in control, finally free from the webs others had spun around her. Letters from admirers, some curious, some enamored with her boldness, flooded her cell. She ignored them all. She had no interest in becoming a legend or a symbol. Detective Sarah Hayes, meanwhile, was left to reflect on the case. She knew that justice had been served, but the complexity of Selma's actions haunted her. How far could someone be pushed before they snapped? The question lingered in Sarah's mind, a constant reminder of how fragile the human psyche could be. The families of the men Selma had killed, especially James Miller's, tried to move on, but the scars of the past remained. Their grief was compounded by the strange truth that Selma had felt justified in her killings. The men were remembered as victims of their own sins, but for their families that didn't lessen the pain. Selma's name would be spoken in whispers for years to come, her story a tragic reminder of the consequences of betrayal. And though she spent her days in a cell, she remained, in the eyes of many, the woman who had lived and died by her own rules.